Jan Wilson and Pete had been blissfully wed for a decade and a half. Pete was the rock on which her life rested, he was everything to her. After Stephanie, their only child, was born 3 years ago, their sex life had become fairly predictable and somewhat boring, but she loved him without conditions. Jen had spent the previous 8 years working for the steel company. Brad Jennings, a charming and charismatic young man, had recently taken over as her new boss, the former woman. Brad was Jan's junior by roughly 7 years. Jen began to feel lustful for Brad. It's not that she considered him Pete's replacement, rather, she considered him as a potential sexual partner. When Brad was chatting to someone else or just passing by, she would not take her eyes off him. She had started to dream of all the things she and Brad would do to one another. She never tried to act on these fantasies, she simply saw them as her own naughty thoughts. But lately, these fantasies had taken on an entirely new intensity. She was starting to get anxious during the day and would constantly daydream about Brad. Pete had noted numerous times that it seemed as though she was a million miles away in her own thoughts. It appeared as though her only thoughts were of imagined sex acts with Brad. She did appear to become more assertive with Pete as a result, demanding things from him that they hadn't done in a long time during their romantic relationship. But all she could think about was Brad doing it to her, even as Pete was building to a climax. She would have been happy to just keep living out her fantasy, but something happened to her that made her dreams come true. Brad had requested that she stay late to finish a contract proposal for a significant customer. When they worked in the evenings, he was the epitome of a gentleman. Brad grinned and nodded, saying, "Yes, this is great," after looking over the completed version of their proposal. "Many thanks, January. As a thank you for a job well done, how about I buy you dinner?" After giving it some thought, Jan's desire ultimately triumphed over her rationality. "Okay, let me call Pete and tell him so he doesn't worry." "Pete, honey, Brad is so pleased with my work tonight," she said as she called their house and got Pete to answer. "As a thank you, he wants to buy me dinner at the restaurant." "Isn't that amazing?" "Okay, so I'll be arriving home a little later than expected." Pete was pleased for her. Since Brad took over as manager, she had told Pete several times that she was afraid Brad didn't value her work because he never acknowledged the quality of her work or even offered her any praise. Pete exclaimed, "Congrats, honey! At last, you are receiving some much-needed acknowledgement. Savor your meal. When you get home, I'll probably be asleep because I have an early appointment tomorrow." After expressing their love to one another, they both hung up. Brad took Jan to one of the city's most elegant restaurants. He was charming, humorous, and devoted to Jan both before and during their romantic candlelit dinner. He gave her an update on his life. He was a Stanford graduate, had been divorced for a year, and only saw his daughter once a week. He cherished his daughter and shared photos of the two of them with January. Though he hoped to eventually let go of the mental anchor and resume dating, he still believed he had feelings for his ex. Jan shared with him her family's background and her affection for her husband and daughter. She did, on a few occasions, extend her arm to touch Brad's hand as she related a proud moment from a family vacation or event. Brad settled the bill for the meal, and they stood at the entrance while the valet wheeled Brad's car around. Brad put a shoulder around Jan's and planted a peck on her cheek. "It was a lot of fun. I appreciate you being such a great date, Jen." Jan, defying her better judgment, wrapped her arm around Brad's waist and gave him a quick kiss. "Brad, I truly like this. For being such a great boss, here's a kiss." Their heads were inches from one another. With fire in his eyes, Brad gave her a fierce look. He put his index finger to her chin, and she lifted her head to meet his eyes. He put his lips to hers, and they shared a passionate kiss while tightly hugging. When Brad's car pulled up, he took his time getting in and made sure his employee was tightly gripping him. Putting her in the car, he drove them to his apartment without saying anything. Thoughts of what she was doing was wrong, but Jan's lust kept sensible thoughts out of her head. They dove into Brad's king-sized bed right away and spent hours poring over each other's bodies. He touched her in ways Pete had never touched her before. They lay weary together well after 1 in the morning. "Brad, I have to get home," Jan said, glancing at the clock. You have always been my dream since you became my boss, so I really shouldn't have done this. I have wanted you since the day I started, Brad said, giving a nod of his head. I was so afraid you would see me lusting for you that I was almost afraid to talk to you. Can we repeat this, Jan? Yes, Brad, I don't love you, but understand that we can do it whenever we get the chance. All I want is to sleep with you. I promise not to jeopardize my love for my family, but I will do things with you that I would never consider doing with my husband. After that, they got up and cleaned the evidence of their sex from their bodies by going to the shower. Brad got her dressed quickly and drove her back to her office car. After several minutes of French kissing in the car, Jan said, "That's enough for now. I need to get home before Pete starts to suspect anything." Pete was fast asleep when Jen got home. She thought, "I do love you," as she glanced at her sleeping spouse. This is merely an affair. I'm sure I'll grow tired of Brad soon. We shall remain husband and wife until the day we die, and you will never, ever know. Brad and Jan met at several motels, at Brad's apartment, in Brad's office, and once in Jan's living room starting that evening and continuing for the next 6 weeks. Like animals in heat, they were. Brad acknowledged that he had not had sex in over a year after his divorce and that he needed a sexual release. Jen acknowledged that she needed some kinky, wild sex to liven up her life. She was even starting to make more overt suggestions to Pete about attempting new things. When she suggested that he take her in a different direction, Pete gave her a suspicious look. "Where did you learn about this, honey?" She was suddenly filled with guilt. She collapsed and spun around to face Pete. "I've been reading way too many sex novels lately, oops. If I made a suggestion that you don't want to follow, I apologize." Pete gave a headshake. "No, that isn't it. You seem to have prior experience with the tasks you're asking me to perform, which is why I find you so aggressive these days. You don't seem like my lover, you act more like my teacher." JY was on the verge of panic. "Dear, I'm so sorry. All I wanted to do was try some new things. I swear that I will no longer read the books that are inspiring these thoughts." Pete merely gave her a smile and a hug. "Whatever you want to read, you can. Please give me some time to get used to trying this new stuff." The following day, Jen showed up for work, entered Brad's office, and shut the door. Brad was informed by her that they would need to put it on hold for a while. Her husband was beginning to show signs of suspicion regarding her increased awareness of sexual positions and behaviors. She was also a little embarrassed about turning into her husband's personal sex instructor. "Jan, you really ought to inform Pete that, to use the slang of the day, we are having sex as friends with benefits rather than as lovers. It would undoubtedly clear your conscience of the guilt you appear to be carrying and restore transparency to our relationship. Pete would just need to realize that it's meaningless to either of us and that you're just scratching an itch. Additionally, it would clarify how you learned about and gained experience with these novel sex acts." As Brad continued massaging Jen, she groaned. Brad continued, "Are you telling me your sex life at home is not 1,000,000 times better since we started doing each other?" Now that Jan and Pete were having sex, it was almost too good to be true. She bent over and planted a passionate kiss on Brad's tongue. "Oh, please, please don't stop me now. I do get horny and hot from you." After this, she thought for several days about telling Pete about Brad. It was becoming more difficult to hide her liaisons with Brad. Pete would be crushed if he found out about Brad through some careless action or mark from her. Jan discussed this with Brad twice more as they rendezvoused with each other at Brad's apartment. "I think I do need to tell Pete about us. He would be crushed if he found out about us through some stupid accidental event. I think I can make him understand that this is just a fling and when it is over, things will be just like they were, except we will have a much better sex life." Brad nodded. "Yes, I think you should. I don't want to be the cause of you breaking up or anything like that. I do like Pete, and I know he loves you a lot. It would hurt him if he found out about our escapades, a hurt so deep he might do something stupid. You have to tell him in a way that will lessen the pain and make him see the long-term outcome." "I will do it tonight. He will understand," Jan replied. Pete had arrived home from work before Jan and had just finished showering. He was going to take her out to dinner tonight with their daughter. He loved these family evenings together. These two women were his whole life. As he opened the shower glass door, he saw a small drop of water that seemed to be inside the glass. Apparently, the door had 2 panes of glass, and somehow the water had made its way between the panes. It was just at a level, so it was hard to miss the little bubble of water. Pete thought to himself, well, I guess I better have that door fixed. Water should not be getting inside it. So, he dried off and began dressing. He was pulling on his trousers when Jen walked in. "Hi, honey," she said. "Hi yourself. You better get ready for dinner, you were running a little late," Pete replied. Pete had no way of knowing that Jan had stopped by Brad's on the way home and now had his juices running down her thigh. This was the first time she had actually brought signs of Brad home with her, but she had needed fortification that what she was going to tell Pete tonight was the right thing to do. Brad had screwed her, and then they had talked through what Jen would say to Pete. JY turned the shower on and closed the shower door. Pete took that opportunity to tell her about the problem with the door and drop of water. He told her that the door would either have to be rebuilt or replaced. She began to slowly undress, and when she got to her panties and bra, Pete sucked in his breath. "Jan, what is that on your thigh?" "It looks like semen," Pete asked nervously. "It is, my darling, but let me explain, okay?" "It is not what you think," Jan began. "You see, Brad and I—" Pete cut her off. "What do you mean it is not what it looks like?" "It is another man's semen dribbling from your snatch. It's your boss's sperm. You're cheating on me." Pete grabbed his head with both hands and dropped to the edge of the bed. Jan walked over and sat on the edge with Pete. She put her arm around him. "Pete, yes, I am having sex with Brad. In fact, it is great sex, but it means nothing. I only love you. Sex with Brad is just that, sex. We are just two friends with benefits. It means nothing and doesn't change anything between you and me." Jen felt good about the way she was ensuring Pete the affair meant nothing. Pete jumped up. "Don't you touch me. You dare to have an affair, cheat on me, and then bring the other man's juices into our bedroom. Get out of my sight, just get out." "No, Pete, this is my house too. There's no need for anyone to leave anyone. As I said, this is just a fling that I am sure will end in a few months. I wanted to tell you before you found out some other way and got hurt. This way, we can put it in the correct perspective, and you will know it means nothing to our relationship." Pete just stared at her. "It means nothing to our relationship? What relationship? You are such a whore that you have another man's juices running down your leg and you see nothing wrong with that. When did you lose your morals? When did you lose your values? And when did you decide that our marriage vows meant nothing to you?" Pete grabbed an overnight bag from the closet and began throwing shaving gear, underwear, and a fresh work shirt in it. "Well, my dear, if you will not leave, I will. I cannot live with a stranger, and you are a stranger. You are not the woman I married. I don't know who you are. I will leave word where I will be in a day or so, but for right now, stay out of my sight." Jen tried to stop Pete. "Honey, we can work this out. Please let us talk." Pete roughly pushed her, and she fell against the wall, hurting her shoulder. He had caused her physical pain. This was not the Pete she loved. She slapped his face with her open hand. Pete stopped and blinked at her. "You slapped me. You tell me you were cheating on me, and now you slap me. Who the hell are you?" "Pete, it is me. I was just stunned by your reaction. You never lifted your hand against me in all of our married life. I just responded. I am sorry, it was wrong to do." "Are you apologizing for slapping me or cheating on me?" Pete said in a level tone. "My thing with Brad is not cheating. There is no love, it is just lust, and you are benefiting from it. Hasn't our sex life been great since I started?" "Screwing Brad?" Have you wanted for anything? Have I been less than the wife you married? What have you lost from my little games with Brad? What have I lost? I lost ever trusting you again. I lost my best friend and my lover. I've lost more than you can imagine. Don't you see that? No, I don't. Suddenly Jen brightened. Look, I know how to put this. Remember that water bubble in the shower door you just told me about? Well, what I have done and will continue to do until I get it out of my system is no more than that water drop in the shower door. Does it affect the usefulness or integrity of the door? No. When that water bubble evaporates, there is no indication it was even there. The glass is still pristine, and the bathroom floor is still dry. That is the impact of my fling with Brad. Just a water bubble in the door. When it is gone, nothing is changed, and nothing is damaged. Pete thought for a moment. Jen, I do love you and always will, but I cannot accept your fling is not damaging our relationship. For right now, I will leave. You do what you think is best. Just remember, as I said about the shower door, the water bubble will result in either the door being repaired or replaced. It is the same with our marriage. So make up your mind with that. Pete left the house. Little did Jen know that it would be the last time they would be in the house together. Jen informed Brad over the phone of what had transpired. Brad invited her back to his place, but Jan politely declined, stating she needed some alone time. Jen continued to believe that Pete had overreacted and would soon realize his mistake. Their wonderful marriage was strong enough to overcome Jan's small transgression. Dreaming of another sex session with Brad, Jan went to sleep. Brad wanted to stay with Jan because she was now his sexual solace, but he was also very understanding of her home situation. She performed her job well. Screw Pete, Brad said to himself. Now that he had her, Brad could use her however he saw fit to suit his needs. It's okay if Pete realized his mistake. Otherwise Brad would use her until he became bored with her. Brad had been looking at an Eastern Caribbean brochure. He was used to vacation cruises. Over a dozen ports were visited during the 2-week cruise. It sounded great, 2 weeks in the Caribbean in the dead of winter. Even so, Jen didn't spend the entire night with Brad. Instead, she would visit him for a couple of hours before leaving. House. She thought Pete would give her a call or drop by to talk about their issues, but he refused to come home as long as Jan carried on her extramarital affair with Brad. In an effort to entice Jan to spend the night with her, Brad had visited her home. Jan had sent her daughter to spend the evening with a girlfriend. The phone had rung just as they had snuggled into Pete's marital bed. Pete was the one. When he realized Brad was there, he lost it. When Jan realized she was going to have sex with Brad in what ought to have been Pete's exclusive domain, she broke down in tears as well. Brad had been asked to leave by Jan, who would see him at work the following day. Brad told Jan at work, "I have wonderful news, sweetheart. I recently reserved a 2-week Caribbean cruise for us. We don't have to worry about Pete's opinion when we share ourselves with each other. Come on the cruise with me. And when we get back, I guarantee Pete will make his way to your door to retrieve you. He will have to come to his senses because he will be so envious." Jan had been thinking that the whole Brad thing was just too expensive. The one man she loved above all had been harmed by her lust. She was thinking, I need just a little quality time with Brad and I will be over him. Jen agreed without hesitation and left Pete a message at his hotel saying, "Pete, baby, it's January. Look, Brad and I are taking a 2-week cruise. I believe that spending this much time with him will be sufficient to quell my body and mind's lust. I will always be all yours when I return. Do you possess that? I spoke for eternity. You can stay at the house and look after our daughter while I'm away for 2 weeks, okay? By the way, the shower door still has a water leak. Though slightly larger than previously, there is still no noticeable damage. As long as you're here, you can handle it. Recall my statement regarding the water bubble inside the door. It's still true, though." Jen departed for the 2-week cruise with Brad. Jen's tolerance for Brad had worn thin after 10 days. The dream had become a harsh reality. They had nothing in common but the sex. Essentially, he used her as a blow-up doll while on the cruise. He wanted to have sex as soon as they woke up in the mornings, but she wanted to wait until they'd showered. She was turned off by the bad smell coming from his mouth in the mornings. Brad snorted so loudly that she had trouble sleeping. She considered it another chink in her fantasy lover's armor. On the 7th night at sea, he had become inebriated and, following an argument about Jan ending the affair, he had smacked her face with an open hand. He later apologized, but it was much too late when she got back home. Jen's lust for this fantasy had faded after 14 days. Shower door, Brad, and Pete. When they finally arrived on the 14th day, Jen gave Brad a hug as he brought her to her front door in the late afternoon. Jan declared, "This is it, Brad. This trip was my fill of you, the fantasy and the lust are gone. Right now, Pete is all I want. I appreciate the wonderful time, but it is now over." "It's over when I say it's over," Brad said, glancing at her. "You will either not have a job tomorrow, or you will do me in your bed tonight." Jen didn't back down. "I'm going to call Pete and open this door. I hope he beats some sense into you because I am telling him that I am sorry for the way I have been acting. If you were still here after that. He is a lot more of a man than you are, so I know he can. You were nothing more than a big, conceited prick. You are just a dumb 304 who likes to spread her legs for cheap thrills," Brad shot back. "Pete will quickly realize that you are and always will be a 304. You'll come crawling back when he leaves, and I might give you me." Brad turned at that point and headed for the car. "Don't bother coming to the office tomorrow," he said as he turned around. "Your termination pay will be sent to you along with the boxed contents of your desk." Jan opened the door and hurried inside. The letter on the kitchen table caught her eye as she reached for the phone. It was written in Pete's wild handwriting and addressed to her. She read the letter after carefully tearing it out of the envelope. "Jan, I should take care of the water bubble in the shower door, as you instructed. Let me start by saying that while you were incorrect to claim that the bubble was not visible, you were correct to link the water bubble to your deceptive behavior with Brad. Had you been present, you would have noticed that the water bubble left a tiny residue on the glass after each occurrence. The residue caused the glass to become clouded over time, making it less clear and making it impossible to see through. Had you been present, you would have observed that the dampness ultimately resulted in the growth of mold and mildew in the spaces between the glass panes. The glass now has a huge black stain on it. Like our marriage, it is not only unattractive but also unhealthy to be around. Your behavior has strained our marriage and created unfavorable circumstances. Similar to the shower door, you have two options. Option 1, mend the door, disassemble it, and reassemble it. Option 2, change the door. Considering our marriage, option 1 was an option up until you made the decision to go on the 2-week cruise with your significant other. I thought there was no way to fix it after that. My preference is option number 2. I'm changing out the shower door. You are being replaced by me. I'm taking the place of our union. I would have been waiting with your daughter to try to mend the marriage if you hadn't gone on your love cruise. The only way out, though, is to replace everything because your continuous cheating on the cruise brought on mold and mildew. Not only are your behaviors unhealthy, but they also poison my love for you. My feelings for you have been killed by you. On the 3rd day of your cruise, Stephanie and I departed. We are currently residing in a location that will be challenging for you to locate. On the day your cruise ends, my attorney will file for divorce on the grounds of adultery. Regarding your antics, the cabin steward on the ship and the residents of Brad's apartment building have both been fired. Additionally, the front desk staff at the different hotels you stayed at for your first relationships have attested to your adultery. Even worse, in your desperate attempt to persuade me that what you did was just sex, I have a tape recording of you speaking to me on the phone. Brad will be fired for cause when he returns to work because I have reported him to his boss for using his position to have sex with you. His business is trying to settle this with me for a settlement. Brad will definitely try to pressure you into having more sex. If you don't give in to his demands and give him what he wants, I think he'll fire you eventually. You should be able to keep your job if he is fired because he will have no control over you in your personal or professional life. However, the staff will likely be aware of what is going on. Since your job will be your only source of income, I hope you have thick skin. You were correct, the water bubble perfectly captures the essence of what you did and the outcome of it. I would peer through the shower door to see if you could ever locate the Jan I married, if I were you. I've signed my share of the house over to you, so if you can afford the mortgage, you can have it. You can now enter what used to be our house with your friends and not feel bad about it. To make a place for Stephanie and myself, I removed half of the furniture. After we settle in, you can speak with Stephanie, but I have to make it clear that she is not allowed to come to the house when there are men around. She doesn't really look up to you as a role model. Pete, your soon-to-be ex-husband. Jan let go of the letter and collapsed to the ground on her knees. Her sensual side of the brain had been subordinated to her sexual lust. Her animal reactions to her lust for Brad had cost her both her amazing marriage and her closest friend. All she had left was an empty house with a water bubble filled with mold and mildew inside the shower door. There's a large black spot in the glass door that seems to be getting bigger every day. She needed the shower door as a constant reminder of her mistake, so she knew she would never fix it. Please feel free to express your opinions in the space provided for comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.